Greetings. Today I am going to talk about a record that I somewhat produced. I'm probably more the executive producer of it. And that record is called War All the Time by Poison Idea. It was the last record that I was involved with in my label, Alchemy Records, that I had with Victor the Mascara Snake Hayden back in the 1980s. And that record is called War All the Time. And the record is named after this book of poems by Charles Bukowski, the excellent and talented and incredible writer who turned his own life into amazing tomes of poetry and novels and short stories. So I'm going to read two poems out of this book. I don't think much of the record was actually based on anything in here other than Poison Idea liked the title. And it is a great title, War All the Time. So I'm going to read one poem in the beginning and one poem at the end that more or less captures the sort of radiance that Poison Idea distributed amongst the people who came across their path, and possibly some of the origins of that. This first poem is called The Condition. And this book once again was published in 1984, I think 1985. So I lived in Los Angeles just previous to that time, so this resonates with me also. The Condition by Charles Bukowski. All up and down the avenues, the people are in pain. They sleep in pain. They awaken in pain. Even the buildings are in pain. The bridges, the flowers are in pain. There is no release. Pain sits, pain floats, pain waits, pain is. Don't ask why there are drunks, drug addicts, suicides. The music is bad, and the love and the script. This place now, as I type this, or as you read this, your place now. So that's a great way to start talking about Poison Idea, because I hear a lot of pain and anger and nihilism, just disconnectedness in their music. But that is another subject, another subjective subject about this. Anyway, in 1987, sometime after I'd worked on the RKO record, Victor Hayden had been talking to Poison Idea. They were based in Portland at the time, and Poison Idea was an extremely notorious band for a variety of reasons. One was their copious drug abuse, or drug use, should I say, drinking, and just kind of collective insanity in the gang that they were. And so when Victor first brought up the idea of doing a Poison Idea record, my initial response was, I think it's a terrible idea. I don't think this is a good idea at all in any way, shape, or form. Victor persevered and kind of worn me down and said, these guys are super enthusiastic and they really want to do it. It sort of reminded me somewhat of the No Effects enthusiasm. Although Poison Idea was rather accomplished at the time and had done some touring, made some records, so there was no question of their ability as to do any of that. But getting them to do that according to parameters that were established was an entirely other thing, and there are countless stories about them going on tours and what happened at the beginning of them and the end of them and during them, and also recordings that they made. Anyway, Alchemy Records sort of had a policy of, we would put up the money on the basis that I would be the producer of the record, and that was more or less to make sure that our money didn't get spent on anything else besides recording. And so it was more kind of an insurance policy to make sure that if things did go haywire in the studio, I'd be able to pick up the slack and kind of bring the thing to fruition and put the whole thing out, being able to deliver a master tape at the end of all of this. So from the very beginning, I'm not sure if Victor was dealing with Jerry or Tom. Incredibly, this was a band that had two guys in it named Tom and Jerry. For those of you who don't know, there might be somebody out there, I can't assume, who Tom and Jerry are. They're primarily known as a cat and mouse cartoon protagonist couple who just spent endless amounts of cartoons chasing each other around, trying to outsmart each other. Alas, the real life Tom and Jerry and Poison Idea didn't really do that, but to begin with, there was quite a bit of, well, here's how we're going to do it, and you're going to send the money to us, we're going to go in the studio and we're going to send you a tape. And so right away, that was a red flag to me. We had a very skinny budget on this, as we did for all of our records. And so going up to Portland and hanging out there was not going to be an option. And so Jerry or Tom was saying to us, you're going to send us the money and we're going to send you a tape, and that's the way it's going to be. And we were trying to negotiate with them and find a way to make this happen. So we suggested that we figure out a way to bring them down to do it in San Francisco, or I can't remember any of the options that came up, but none of them were amiable to Tom or Jerry. And once again, this was coming sort of third party, because this came from the band to Victor and then to me. So I'm not sure exactly what was being said. At any rate, we kind of came to a decision where we had them provide a recording studio to us, and we got a hold of the recording studio and made an arrangement with them to pay the recording studio directly. I'm not sure if that happened or not, or we didn't really get an itemized receipt from the recording studio. It was just kind of a for services rendered type of receipt. So I don't know if the band Poison Idea got any sort of a kickback and what they might have done with this kickback. This is all highly speculative on my part, but due to their reputation, this was something I was thinking at the time, and I possibly even floated it to Victor, and he said, well, I really want to do this. Poison Idea are great, which they were within a certain milieu. And so that arrangement was made. Poison Idea went in the studio. They kind of disappeared. I guess we had some dead space for a while. And then they said, okay, well, we've done this, and I think we might have gotten some demos or whatever. And the next phase was to talk about how this was going to be mixed. And so I suggested, okay, we can mix this in probably 2 or 3 days. So I'll come up to Portland and we'll mix it up there. No, we want our new drummer, The Hippie Slayer was his name, or not sure if he was going by that name at that point, but Steve Hanford, I believe, was his name. And so once again, Tom or Jerry, I'm kind of thinking it was Tom, said, no, our boy's going to mix it. We're going to do it up here. And so I didn't really relish going to Portland for even 3 days to hang out with these guys to try and make this mix happen. So I said, okay, well, let's bring somebody down. We'll bring Steve down to do this. There was no real question of Poison Idea traveling really anywhere by plane, because to be honest, both Tom and Jerry at the time were weighing about 350 pounds. So I think there's even a story about how they had some tours canceled because the starting place was other than where they lived, and simply they had to fly first class because there were no seats big enough to put these guys in. True story. And so anyway, an arrangement was made. Steve was going to come down to San Francisco. We booked a studio for 3 days, I think, for mixing. And so that happened. Steve came down to San Francisco. This was, I think, the first record that he'd ever mixed or worked on. So I was just more or less in an executive producer position, and I basically got him to the studio. We went in the studio. He had the tapes with him. threw the tapes up on the machine. And he said, okay, so what do you want to do? And I said, I want you to mix this record. That's what I want you to do. And he kind of looked at me and went, yeah? And I go, well, that's what I've heard from your bosses or the people that are running your band or whatever. They said, you're mixing this record, so that's what you're doing. We're already on a weird level of communication with them, so I don't plan to give them any excuse for this to get any weirder, so let's get started on this. And we've got a limited time to mix all these tracks, so that's what we did. We started working our way through all the material, and I kind of helped him set up extremely rudimentary mixes on the console, and we just sort of worked through everything. It sounded to me like things were done in maybe 2 or 3 different sessions, so I didn't really inquire to that at all. I just let the thing happen and kind of made sure that we got a master tape together, and I wasn't even in charge of the mastering of that particular record. I'm not sure if it went over to Fantasy to have George Horn do it. He did all the previous records for Alchemy. And so Alchemy was already, Victor was behaving strangely, this band Poison Idea was behaving strangely, and I was not having very good feelings about the whole thing, which was confirmed later on in the year, of course, when Victor decided I was trying to steal the label from him. But you can see all of that in my other video about Alchemy Records. So anyway, we complete this Poison Idea mix of this record, and I don't really hear anything, and I'm going about my business, moving out of San Francisco at this point and looking forward to where I'm going to be going. I'm spending time in Los Angeles, spending time in El Paso, moving things, and just kind of hand over the tape to Victor or whatever for its final processing. And I'm in El Paso, Texas, at my parents' house, and my mother, I'm staying with my parents. My mother comes in and with a fairly worried look on her face and says, oh, there's a message for you on the phone machine. This was back when you had to have a phone machine for messages. And I said, oh yeah, who is it from? Because barely anybody had my parents' phone number. I might have left it with Victor because I was traveling, and you know, if you wanted to be able to get in touch with somebody, you had to leave a number where you could be reached back in the past. So I went in and just clicked play on my parents' phone machine, and they always had their phone machine nice and loud so you could hear everything very well. And the first thing I hear is, I think it's Tom going, what the fuck, man? I don't know what the fuck you think you're doing, but this record sounds like shit, and you're fucked, man. We are gonna fuck you so hard, blah, blah, blah. And I was just sitting there quietly with my mother, and my mother was just kind of going, trying to read the paper, listening to this. I'm not sure she'd listened to it all the way through. I just let it go all the way through so I could enjoy the fullness of it. And it got all the way to the end, and there was basically threats of violence, threats of suing, threats of just, I don't know, a variety of kinds of threats. It was kind of like a big piñata filled with threats from somebody who sounded extremely agitated. And so I just went, okay, whatever. And my parents didn't have anything to say about it. They just kind of went more or less business as usual, coming from my direction, I guess. And so I went, there wasn't a number to call him back, unfortunately. So he just got to have dead space also, or probably yelled at Victor. So I think Victor probably just gave him my phone number because I couldn't imagine anybody else doing it. I got back to San Francisco and to the house I was living with Lori Black at the time. And she was somewhat ashen and said, "Oh, you need to listen to these." And of course I had another phone machine to listen to that had 4 or 5 messages this time about how fucked up shit was and how we were gonna fuck your shit up and just all this. Just really, it got to be sort of hilarious in a way, and I just couldn't quite figure out if it was Tom or Jerry. I'm thinking maybe it was more Tom, but I do want to put in a message to Jerry and find out if it was him or not. Anyway, at this point I was somewhat disturbed, but also at the same time, I knew these guys couldn't afford first-class tickets to San Francisco, so nobody was getting on a plane to do anything, and they weren't getting in their minivans to drive down to cause trouble. So I'm listening to more recordings of this barrage, threats of violence, lots of profanity, lots of just threats and weird excess information that I don't need about how the record sounds, and frankly by this time I don't care about this record one bit. So I get the number from Victor, whoever, I call up, whoever it is, get some further barrage. "Oh, Mark, okay, you're fucking calling me now, okay, fucking whatever." And I just let this go on until it expires, and then I say, "Well, okay, first of all, Steve did mix your record for you. You know, well, it sounds like shit, you know, weren't you there? Couldn't you do something to make it not sound like shit?" And to be honest, I couldn't have done anything to not make it sound like shit because I wasn't aware that it was sounding like shit. So it's since become kind of a classic record. Everybody loves the sound of it. So I was just thinking, this is how they want this thing to sound, albeit by a second party who's never mixed a record before. So that's what it sounded like. I had no idea what it was supposed to sound like, since I wasn't involved in the recording or anything like it. So I managed to kind of calm him down and go, "Yeah, well, okay, man. You know, just wanted to, you know," I think there was even an apology involved. "Yeah, sorry, I flew off the handle, whatever, blah, blah, blah." Okay, great, click. And never again did I speak to anybody from Poison Idea or Steve Hanford, although I think Steve Hanford had some kind of a GoFundMe for some sort of legal fees before he went to prison, and I think I actually sent him $25, so for whatever that's worth, I have no idea. Anyway, Poison Idea continued on for a while, had about 25 more members circulate in and out of the band. And the stories are out there of Poison Idea's absolute insanity and drug use, like there are for many bands, unfortunately, in music. That's one of the reasons why I read the previous Charles Bukowski poem about pain, and then I'll read another one further that seems to kind of reflect their whole zeitgeist. And there were a lot of strange tales about them, one being how they got a float to go on a European tour, and they spent the entire float on heroin and cocaine, and then did all the drugs before going to the airport and then on the plane, and then just arrived in wherever, Berlin, Milan, London, just withdrawing like crazy from drugs and being broke. So these are one of a myriad of tales about Poison Idea. And I think at this point, Jerry has actually written an autobiography that has 3 volumes that I would love to read, just because he was such a character. I barely met them. Clown Alley, never played with them. I think I saw them maybe once or twice in the very early days. So that is all I've got on Poison Idea. The record is a legendary record, as I've said before. A lot of people really love this. Unfortunately, it was somewhat of a bitter experience, not even bittersweet, can I say. But there it is. My name's not even on the record anywhere. It was the last thing I was involved with with Alchemy, and like everything else on Alchemy Records, it had a very specific flavor, a very specific experience, and is seared in my memory in quite a few ways that are interesting and memorable. So I'm going to read the last poem from this book, War All the Time. And incidentally, there's not a poem in here called War All the Time, but the line War All the Time is in one of the poems towards the end of the book. I'm not going to find that one. I'm just going to read this one called Now, which sums up somewhat of the poison idea mentality. I think they live for now and died for now in some cases. Now, well, now some eat to forget, some drink to forget, and some make love to forget. And some take drugs to forget, and some go to the movies to forget. And some sleep to forget, and some travel to forget, and some work crossword puzzles to forget, and some chop wood to forget, and some stand on their heads to forget. But what do they remember? You can't tell me many things they do to remember, like I write this poem to remember to forget. Some go to the circus to forget. Some fly gliders to forget. Some mix salads. Some pole vault. Some shave their skulls. Some walk through fire. As the water boils over, as the president laces his shoes, as the can-can girls can. There are whole oceans full of tears of agony, and my father sits across the room from me now with his big fat jowls of shimmering slime, knowing I'm typing about him now, knowing that I've failed to remember to forget. I switch on the radio and get Stravinsky. Note the dirt under my fingernails. He's the best. So there you have that. And I'm pretty sure that Poison Idea operated under some of the tenets in that poem. Definitely, except for maybe the Stravinsky part and the part about can-can girls. But we can't be precise about that unless it's all in Jerry's book. And just a quick hi to Jerry, you're a legend. And yeah, you are.